Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 43 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Flora Paul. Flora is down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She works currently for an outfit called UOL, which is, I'll let Flora tell you more about that because it sounds kind of like AOL meets GoDaddy or something like that. Can you tell me more about the UOL?
It's one of the largest and oldest portals in Brazil. I remember when I was using dial-up internet in 1997, we would use UOL to connect the dial-up. So it's pretty old in a way, but they really kind of kept up with what was happening in the internet world, and they're really trying to focus to gain more millennial views. So they're really trying to be up to date.
That's so interesting because when I look at that site, I see a combination of like AOL and Yahoo, which have completely lost relevance in the US. Like they're just gone. But UOL is like a huge, they're like, I think they're the 5th most visited website in Brazil. Is that correct?
Yes. I think they're fifth in Comscore. It's huge. And the numbers are pretty close to Facebook and Google, actually.
Interesting.
So it's a huge portal. It's usually people just go to UOL to know if their internet connection is running. It's like that kind of site. Like everyone knows it. Again,
back to the AOL analogy. I remember back then people thought of AOL as the internet, and it sounds like that's kind of how UOL is. Interesting. But you came from, recently you were with a kind of a cooler job. Well, I mean, or a job that more people in the US might recognize. You were an editor and a writer and a content strategist at BuzzFeed. And tell me a little bit about your time there, because one of the things, the reason I invited Flora on the show, everyone, is that I came across a post or something where you had talked about measuring content effectiveness, and I think you came up with the term editorial intelligence. Tell me a little bit about that, like how that came to be.
Well, I worked for BuzzFeed Brasil for 4 years, and I was like the 6th person in Brazil to work for BuzzFeed. We're a pretty small team, and I was a staff writer for 2 years, and I really wanted to grow, and our team was so small, so I decided let's see what I can do to grow. And
sorry about that. I didn't put my phone on. Okay,
it's silent. It's okay.
Sorry about that.
I was figuring out what could I do to grow in the company, and BuzzFeed actually had a pretty cool culture of having all the data available to everyone in the company. You could click on any post and know the numbers and where it came from and such and such. But we never really looked at the numbers how can we grow from here? We kind of just were on a run and everything worked so well. So I was like, maybe we should try to take a look at the numbers and see what we can learn from that. Maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And
what did you discover? Were there particular metrics or patterns, or how did you turn that from just raw data into actionable editorial insight?
Well, I think in a way my job is to transform data, boring data numbers into cool content. And what happened is you take a look at the top posts, you take a look at the flop posts as well, and you kind of try to see patterns in them. Or, when we use such and such words or themes, frames or formats that were working, how we could develop there. If a food is something that people really click to read, and quizzes they really like as well. So let's do more food quizzes and see what happens. And pretty much it always worked. So I started setting goals for our team. Like, wow, now we have to do like 8 trivia food quizzes this month to reach a certain goal of page views. And it always pretty much worked. So I started setting goals looking at our numbers.
That's interesting, because one thing I think a lot of people, like I maybe I'm just projecting my impression of it, but you kind of develop an impression of BuzzFeed and you think, oh, it's kind of clickbaity, like quizzes and headlines and stuff. But obviously, but you identified patterns. I assume these were replicable, and that you could kind of grow and iterate on them and do like kind of, was there a lot of fine tuning and ways to engage maybe different people or more people with subsequent versions of stuff? Or
yeah, I think because, at the same time that it's cool that everyone has access to the numbers, that can start to, become a certain pressure in the whole team. And I didn't want them to be so stressed. So I was pretty much giving a formula like, this is what works. We can do a few posts like such and such that will work and will give us page views and will hit our goals. And we can, have room to create other things, new things, because we're, guaranteeing the page views we should be getting. So it was kind of like using the numbers and formulas like on our side of the game.
And it sounds like you were balancing a lot there, like sort of the team morale, like, oh man, I just had 3 duds in a row, and trying to cheer that person up or get them back into it, or I don't know if people got like big heads when they had like 10 big successes in a row. So you're balancing that, but it also reminds me, like I'm an old school. I went to journalism school back in the 80s, and there was this really strong wall between the business side and the editorial side in that era. And you're straddling that. I mean, those numbers are just right there transparently in the editorial department the whole time. Tell me about how you manage those dynamics.
We could look at the page views. I mean, the really business side of the company was really separate from the editorial. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why I decided to focus on the term editorial intelligence and not business intelligence, because that could be too literal. But, I feel like it's a way, like journalists, they really like writing and they don't really matter other stuff. And it was an easy way to look at the numbers and, just work with it.
Well, no, I think what you just said is true in my experience as well. What is it in your background, do you think, that made you curious about those numbers and sort of willing to kind of quantify journalistic effort? Like that's not a real common path among journalists.
True. Yeah. And I was working on such cool places like MTV and Glamour Mag and BuzzFeed, and I decided to do something so like serious, I guess. But I guess I'm kind of a type A personality kind of person and very organized and things like that. And I just decided, I noticed that looking at numbers, I could make out all of our lives easier. So that's all I did. I just wanted to make sure we were organizing and registering, because we were just going with the flow and we never really registered anything about our growth. So I really wanted to be that person to organize it.
Yeah, and probably way better to have somebody like you doing it than an MBA from the business side coming over and or tell me about that. Did you interact with the business side, like the circulation or advertising or other people on the business side, and kind of tweak the data or your editorial intelligence based on that? Or
I would create like weekly reports and monthly reports to the whole office in Brazil, obviously, but so everyone would get it, because I think the sellers can't really sell a good product if they don't really know what we're doing. I mean, especially for BuzzFeed, branded content has to be interesting, just as interesting as any content. So I think it was pretty important for everyone to know what was working, what wasn't working, what we were doing, like breakthrough content, and what didn't work. And sometimes actually the people from the business side would like slack me, like, can you really get the numbers about like such like fast food so we can try and sell to fast food companies? Then I would like get on Looker, which is a great CQL tool.
What's that called again?
Tool. Yeah. Looker.
Oh, Looker. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great SQL tool, and I would like get the average views from posts that had like fast food or mentioning any brands on the title or, throughout the whole content. And that would give us like leads, like, should we go to a fast food company? And well, obviously, yes, because we were millennials, but that can work with pretty much anything. Like, for example, millennials don't really have cars, so maybe we shouldn't try to sell cars. And so
you're informing like sales strategy with the editorial insights that you have.
Exactly. Like, yeah. I never really knew if it worked or not, if they sold or not, only when it was up online already. But yeah, I think the work was not only to, to help the team, the editorial team, to make the team feel better about themselves and work happy and stuff, but overall, I think it helped all the teams from BuzzFeed.
Yeah. Hey, I want to back up a little bit to that Looker tool that you mentioned. So you said that's like a SQL lookup tool, like a reporting tool to look in. Tell me what kind of data do you have a custom CMS at BuzzFeed, or what were you? Where was all that content stored?
Yeah, BuzzFeed has a lot of cool tools that they themselves develop. Dow, who now is she for like something big, I think recently she was product, and now she's like leading other stuff as well. She, alongside Jonah Peretti, was one of the founders of BuzzFeed, and she always like focused on making great product. And BuzzFeed itself had a lot of good, very easy, understandable tools, so everyone could like stay on top of our game. But there was Looker, who is an outside company that you pay a lot to have access to their tool, and they really use your database and analytics as well. They had really good numbers, and you kind of like, the thing with Looker, it's not very intuitive, but you really can get any answer if you're patient enough to learn, and if you know a little bit of code, you can get any answer. And I would create like dashboards for the whole team to, keep up with our progress and how our goals were going. It wasn't just about figuring out numbers. You could actually create visual aids to the team.
Oh, interesting. Did you use like Tableau or another visual front end thing to?
Yeah, Looker is kind of like the Britney to Tableau Christina, or something like that.
Okay, no, I get what you mean. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, so so with all those tools and all that data and information that you're working with, but you're still going back and forth with the editorial team on the creative side of things, and you're coming up with. So you've mentioned like you kind of have some templates and formulas at work, and then some conventions at work, and then which you can validate with all that data. Can you tell me like how all that kind of went back and informed? Like, are there like story formats or different things that you did based on that data that were then validated by, subsequent looks at the reader behavior?
Yeah, I mean, BuzzFeed has pretty classic formats. Like, there's the listicle, now there's a lot of quizzes, there's, how internet is reacting to things with very popular tweets. So there were a few formats, not a few, there were a lot of formats actually. And I was kind of crossing frames and formats, like if a format goes well, like a trivia quiz, any trivia quiz about food would do super well in Brazil. Then, well, you know what? Our readers really like TV series. Maybe we should try to do a trivia quiz about TV shows and stuff like that. And that usually had good results.
Right, and sort of a general interest publication like BuzzFeed, you have that opportunity. You have a lot of, well, it's just a big grid of like things that you do and verticals that you go into.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much. And
right.
you could use the numbers to back it up. Like, well, like for example, in Brazil, in the first 2 years, Brazilians hated quizzes. It didn't work at all. And then all of a sudden, Brazilians started loving quizzes. It started doubling up the page views to very like huge numbers.
Wow,
So
that's super interesting because that's like you think of like culture as being like slowly evolving, like, oh, Brazilians just don't like quizzes. But all of a sudden, what do you think happened in there? What do you think was the change?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
think international BuzzFeed started doing, US BuzzFeed started doing more quizzes because their audience always like it, and probably started spiking the page views as well. And so one of our best writers did one very simple checklist, like it was like, are you too nice? And people, step on you because of that, and it went viral. I think people really, BuzzFeed, the key to BuzzFeed success was relatable content. And I guess, one day our audience understood that quizzes could be relatable. So actually the first format that did super well with quizzes were checklists, because you just go checking, like we would joke like our readers are starting to know themselves through our quizzes. So it started with checklists, and that was really relatable, and they would share like, oh, I am 70% something. And so people started to really liking BuzzFeed quizzes. And then we started, they got a little bored of that, and they started liking personality quizzes in general, not just listicle quizzes. And then we started doing trivias, and BuzzFeed was, the product team was always really coming up with new formats. So we would just explore more and more. And that was pretty much how it started. So I think, yeah, with BuzzFeed, everything had to be relatable. And if you really hit that note, that relatable note, it works. It was how it worked with our quizzes in Brazil.
Interesting, that relentless focus on the reader and the customer. Hey, and which kind of reminds me of like something I want to kind of hear about how it evolved for you. So you went from being, your title when you first started at BuzzFeed was like writer, staff writer, or editor,
Staff
something
writer.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, staff writer. But then when you left, you were identified as a content strategist. Tell me what the professional, because it's not hard to infer from everything we're talking about, like how that happened. But what was the sort of professional track to that? Like when did you just wake up one morning and your boss said, hey, you're a content strategist? Or how did that?
I was that annoying type A personality person who was always wanting more. And so every end of the year review, I was like, I need more. I need to grow. I need new titles. I need new goals. And so I was already like, since I was super organized, I was already like leading learning labs with the other staff writers. I started editing as well. And then it was like, you know what, you're really organized. Maybe you should take a look at the numbers as well, since you think we should start registering that. And so I pretty much started doing it. And then they were like, wow, you're being promoted to content strategist. And I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Oh, great.
And that was it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Yeah, hey, there was something else I was going to ask you. About just on I know, about back to the kind of story templates. I've had this ongoing theme in this interview series of people talking about how like a lot of organizations they have, like they're very creative and always come up with unique and new story ideas. And the other end of the spectrum is people who just have a system and stick to it and execute on that. It sounds like BuzzFeed and I don't know, is UOL like that as well? More on the, not formulaic, but sort of maybe kind of, and template's not the exact right word, but sort of having a formula and a way of doing things, and then filling that in with the current relevant content, versus like, like somebody like the New York Times, like doing, long
long reads
pieces or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like for BuzzFeed, honestly, finding the formulas was a way to guarantee we had good numbers and we could create more freely. Like at the same time, that I was putting goals to the team, like you should do such format or such frame or such themes. At the same time, we would do like the Freaky Wednesday day, and everyone could publish the craziest ideas they had. So we really tried to balance that. UOL is having like, they're really pushing like long reads as well. They're trying to go into that really actually old school reporting with really long interviews and pretty photos. At the same time, it's a huge team. There are more than 200 journalists there. So, there's a little bit of everything. You can get informational news and, also really long reads. They're really trying to balance that. With BuzzFeed Brazil, we were just relying on formulas so we could be crazier at the end of the day.
So you could buy yourself some time to do the creative fun stuff. That seems like a fair deal.
In the end, everything in BuzzFeed was pretty fun. Like, it wasn't like the formula really killed the fun part of it, because the content itself was funny and relatable and easygoing. So the formula was just there to help.
Yep. Yeah. Like a kind of. Hey, I noticed these always go so quickly. We're coming up on time, but I always like to give my guests one last chance. Is there anything that hasn't come up that I haven't asked you about, or that's just on your mind about content strategy or content in general these days that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I was really impressed with how the media was open to, was interested in what I was doing. So I found a job pretty quickly after the layoffs, and 2 days after the layoffs. And I feel like it's rare, because there's not a lot of people. Like, you can read about data journalism, but that's not the same thing, because that's focused on the actual writing and not the process of how things get done and managing.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yep.
So it was actually weird to kind of realize what I was doing wasn't so common, and there was interest in that. So the first thing I told all my friends that were looking for jobs were like, please put strategy on your LinkedIn, because people are really looking for strategy people. And we know content. I mean, we just have to study a little more, but we really know content, and numbers are not that hard. So I feel like there's a lot of room for content strategy and editorial intelligence and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like, and it's gratifying to hear, because it feels to me like, as I do this interview series, and I do a lot of networking and talking in the world about this stuff, and it just seems like we're kind of at this cusp of really appreciation and genuine broad scale understanding and value of the discipline of content strategy. So that's a strategy. So that's gratifying to hear that you were just immediately, you get on the market for 2 days and some big giant media conglomerate says, oh, we need her. So.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, actually. I mean, and I do feel like I'm still doing journalism. I'm just in the background, I'm behind the cameras, I'm behind the typewriters, but it's still pretty exciting. And it's pretty cool when you realize an insight you gave worked, even because it doesn't matter if something is a formula, it always can not work, but
right.
It's really fun when it does. It's really gratifying when it does.
Yep. And then like you said, it buys you, it gave you the opportunity to do other stuff as well. They'd be more creative beyond the formulaic stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Nice.
We shouldn't be afraid of numbers and formulas and stuff. We like writing, but we can be friends with numbers and data and stuff.
That's funny. I'm laughing because I'm thinking of so many of my journalism friends who went to journalism school because they didn't want to take any more math classes. And now it's like, oh, you should listen to Flora. She's got some good ideas about that.
Yeah. I actually liked math in high school, but I don't know. It's just, we all know that as writers, our bosses are really wanting us to make bigger numbers. We know that. So might as well deal with it, not avoid it.
Mm-hmm. No, we can all take that lesson that you got. Like, yeah, if we just get better at showing the success of our work, we'll get more of it.
Exactly.
Yep.
Like, numbers are on our side.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Flora. This has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time.
That was super nice. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Obrigado.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.